At 2:47 a.m. on October 15, 2023, the Riverside County Emergency Dispatch received a call that would unravel one of Connecticut's most chilling family secrets. A woman's voice, trembling but controlled, reported a missing person from the Willowbrook estate, one of the county's most prestigious addresses. But this wasn't just any missing person case. And the victim wasn't just any woman. When investigators finally pieced together what happened behind the iron gates of that 12-acre property, they would discover a murder so calculated, a cover-up so methodical, that it would expose the darkest side of American privilege. This is the true story of Elena Domingo, a woman who crossed an ocean chasing dreams, only to be buried beneath the very foundation of wealth she helped maintain. Elena Marie Domingo was born in 1989 in Davao City, Philippines, into a family that understood the cost of opportunity. Her father, Roberto, taught mathematics at Davao Central High School for 32 years, earning roughly 18,000 pesos monthly, barely $400 in American currency. Her mother, Luz Santos Domingo, worked the night shift at Davao Regional Medical Center, where she'd been a registered nurse since 1987. The family lived in a modest concrete house in the Matina district, 3 bedrooms shared by 5 people, with a tin roof that drummed like thunder during monsoon season. Elena's older sister Sofia had become an accountant at a local shipping firm. Her younger brother Miguel was in his 3rd year studying civil engineering at the University of Mindanao. They were, by Filipino standards, successful, but success in the Philippines meant something entirely different than it did in America. Elena graduated with her Bachelor of Science in Nursing in 2010, the culmination of 4 years of studying by candlelight during power outages and working weekend shifts at her aunt's sari-sari store to afford textbooks. She passed her board exams on the first attempt, scoring in the top 15% nationally. For 18 months, she worked at St. Luke's Medical Center in Manila, earning 18,000 pesos a month, the same salary her father had made after 3 decades of teaching. She shared a single room in a boarding house with 2 other nurses, sleeping on a thin mattress on the floor, sending half her salary home to Davao every month. Her mother had worked in Dubai in the 1990s as an overseas Filipino worker, sending money that paid for their house, for Sofia's education, for Miguel's future. Now it was Elena's turn to make the sacrifice that Filipino families understood as both duty and love. The decision to work abroad came in late 2016, when Sofia announced her engagement and Miguel needed tuition for his final year. Elena contacted Pacific Care Solutions, an agency specializing in placing Filipino caregivers with wealthy American families. The promise was simple: $3,000 to $4,000 monthly, private accommodation, and the opportunity to save more in 2 years than she could in 20 in Manila. She had a boyfriend, Marco Reyes, a fellow nurse she'd been dating for 3 years. They'd talked about marriage, about saving together, about buying a small apartment in Quezon City. At the airport in March 2017, Marco held her as she cried into his shoulder. 2 years, she whispered. Then I come home and we start our life. She boarded Philippine Airlines Flight 112 to Los Angeles believing every word. She had no way of knowing she would never see her homeland again. The Ashford family had occupied the same position in Connecticut society for 4 generations, the kind of wealth that didn't announce itself but simply existed, like oxygen or gravity. Richard Ashford, 64 years old in 2017, had built Ashford Capital Management into a $3.2 billion investment firm, managing portfolios for 73 ultra-high net worth families across the Northeast. He'd graduated from Wharton in 1975 and Harvard Business School in 1985. The same year he married Patricia Whitmore, daughter of a Connecticut governor and granddaughter of a Standard Oil executive. Their wedding at St. John's Episcopal had been covered in the society pages of the Hartford Courant. They were American aristocracy, the kind of people whose names appeared on museum plaques and hospital wings. The Willowbrook estate sat on 12 acres of manicured property, purchased in 1987 for $2.3 million and now valued at $18 million. The main house, a Georgian colonial built in 1924, sprawled across 15,000 square feet, 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, and a wine cellar that Richard was planning to expand. The grounds included a 4-car garage, a heated pool house, and a converted carriage house from the original 1924 construction. This 800-square-foot structure, with its exposed beam ceilings and river-stone fireplace, would become Elena's home and eventually her tomb. Patricia Ashford, 62, maintained the family's social position with the precision of a military campaign. She served on the boards of 4 charitable foundations, hosted an annual garden party that raised 6 figures for the County Art Museum, and kept a daily medication routine that included Xanax, Ativan, and Ambien, prescriptions from 3 different doctors who never compared notes. She spoke with a lockjaw accent that marked her breeding, wore Chanel suits to the grocery store, and possessed an unusual skill from her childhood, the ability to forge anyone's handwriting after studying it for 20 minutes. She'd learned it as a party trick at Vassar, copying professors' signatures to amuse her sorority sisters. She never imagined this talent would one day help her cover up a murder. Their oldest child, Stephen, 42, was everything the family had engineered him to be. Harvard undergraduate, Harvard Law, and now COO of Ashford Capital Management, overseeing $200 million in client assets. He'd married Caroline Winters, a Yale graduate from another Connecticut dynasty, and they'd produced 2 children who attended the same private academy Stephen had. He lived 3 miles from his parents in a $4.5 million estate, drove a Mercedes S-Class, and presented the image of patriarchal success. But those who knew him well, very few people did, had witnessed the rage that lived behind his Brooks Brothers exterior. At 16, he'd kicked the family's golden retriever so hard he'd broken its ribs. The dog had to be euthanized. Richard paid the veterinarian $5,000 to record the cause of death as complications from old age. Stephen learned early that money could rewrite reality. Vanessa, 38, was the perfect daughter in every visible way. Yale undergraduate, Columbia MBA, married to Dr. James Chun, a cardiologist at Yale New Haven Hospital. She called herself a nonprofit consultant, which was code for not working while maintaining the appearance of purpose. She had one daughter, Lily, 8 years old, enrolled in the same private academy as Stephen's children. Vanessa specialized in passive aggression and strategic silence, the kind of woman who could destroy someone with a smile and a well-timed omission. She'd never directly participated in cruelty, but she'd never stopped it either, and in families like the Ashfords, silence was its own form of violence. Brandon, 28, was the family's beautiful mistake. He'd started at Princeton in 2007 with the same advantages as his siblings, but cocaine found him during his sophomore year, and by junior year, he was expelled after campus police discovered 8 grams in his dorm room. Richard paid $150,000 to keep the arrest off public records. Brandon had drifted since then, working sporadically at his father's firm, showing up 2 days a week when he showed up at all. He lived in the estate's pool house after overdosing in the main house at 25, an incident the family referred to as his episode and never discussed in detail. He was sensitive where Stephen was cold, artistic where Vanessa was calculated, and fundamentally unsuited for the life his family demanded. The drugs were his escape from the crushing weight of being an Ashford. They were also killing him slowly, and everyone knew it, and nobody knew how to stop it. Margaret Ashford, 76, was Richard's mother, widow of Thomas Ashford, who died in 2015 from pancreatic cancer. Thomas had made the family's real fortune, not through finance but through medical device patents worth $47 million. Margaret moved to the Willowbrook estate in 2016, 6 months after Thomas's death, when living alone became impossible. Her Parkinson's disease, diagnosed in 2017, progressed with cruel efficiency. Her hands trembled constantly, her balance failed. By early 2017, she needed full-time care, and the family cycled through caregivers every 6 months, each one fired for reasons that ranged from unprofessional to making mother uncomfortable. The truth was simpler. Margaret was difficult because she was dying, and dying people don't always maintain the pleasant facade that families like the Ashfords require. On March 12, 2017, Elena Domingo arrived at JFK Airport with 2 suitcases, $400 in cash, and a work contract that promised her $800 weekly. Gladys Chun from Pacific Care Solutions met her at baggage claim, holding a sign with Elena's name spelled incorrectly, Elena Domingo. The 2-hour drive to Connecticut felt like entering another world. Elena had seen American movies, but nothing prepared her for the scale of everything. The highways with 6 lanes, the houses that could fit 10 Filipino families, the cars that cost more than her parents would earn in their lifetimes. Gladys, a second-generation Chinese-American who spoke Tagalog poorly, offered advice that sounded like warnings. Keep your head down. Don't ask for anything extra. These people, they're not like us. They'll smile at you and fire you the same day. Patricia Ashford greeted Elena at the estate's front door with the warmth of someone inspecting a package. "You'll address us as Mr. and Mrs. Ashford," she said, her voice carrying the particular condescension Americans reserve for those they employ. "This is the carriage house where you'll stay. You have your own entrance, your own bathroom. Sundays are free after church if mother is stable, though obviously if there's an emergency, we'll need you available." The carriage house was smaller than Elena's family home in Davao, but it was hers alone, the first time in her 28 years she'd had complete privacy. The stone fireplace didn't work. The heating was loud and erratic, but there was a window overlooking the estate's garden, and in the mornings, before Margaret woke, Elena could pretend she was anywhere but here. Margaret's room was on the first floor of the main house, converted from what had been Richard's study. Elena's first glimpse of her patient was a woman propped on pillows, hands shaking badly enough to rattle the water glass on her nightstand. "Are you the one they hired to watch me die?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp despite the tremor. Elena, who'd been trained to handle difficult patients, smiled gently. "I'm here to help you live, ma'am." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then smiled back, the first genuine expression Elena had seen since arriving. "You're different from the others," Margaret said. "They usually lie better." The first month established Elena's reality. She woke at 6 to prepare Margaret's medications, 12 different pills organized by time and purpose. She assisted with physical therapy exercises that Margaret resisted with profane creativity. She helped with bathing, with dressing, with the thousand small indignities of a body that no longer obeyed its owner's commands. Patricia criticized everything. Elena's cooking was too spicy, her English too accented, her manner too familiar. Stephen barely acknowledged her existence except to complain about cost. $800 a week seemed extravagant for someone who just handed out pills. Vanessa was worse, offering saccharine smiles while asking Elena to clean up after family dinners. Tasks explicitly outside her job description but impossible to refuse without seeming difficult. The only kindness came from unexpected places. Margaret, during her lucid hours, asked about Elena's family, her education, her dreams. And Brandon, the youngest son living in the pool house, started appearing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning when Elena couldn't sleep. He'd find her making tea, and he'd sit across from her at the granite island, his eyes red from whatever he'd taken that night, and he'd ask her about the Philippines, about what she missed, about whether she ever regretted coming here. "You're the only person in this house who chose to be kind," he told her one April morning as dawn broke over the estate. Elena studied his face, handsome despite the damage drugs had done, sad in ways she recognized from working with dying patients. "Kindness costs nothing," she replied. "Your family just forgot." Something in Brandon's expression shifted. For the first time in years, someone had seen him as more than the family disappointment. And for Elena, isolated in a foreign country where everyone treated her as furniture, Brandon's attention felt like being remembered that she was human. Neither of them understood what they were beginning. Neither recognized the danger. In families like the Ashfords, love between the wrong people wasn't romantic. It was a threat to the entire social order. And threats, in their world, had to be eliminated. The transformation happened so gradually that neither Elena nor Brandon could identify the exact moment friendship became something more. Between March 2017 and June 2018, those late-night kitchen conversations became the architecture of a relationship neither had intended. Brandon would appear around 2 a.m., when the house was silent and his family was asleep, when the cocaine or whatever else he'd taken had worn off enough that he could think clearly but not so much that he could sleep. Elena, awake from checking Margaret's breathing or adjusting her position to prevent bed sores, would find him there. They'd sit on opposite sides of the kitchen island, and Brandon would ask questions that nobody in his family had ever bothered to ask. What was Davao City like? Did she have someone waiting for her? What did she dream about before she came here? Elena told him about Marco, about the life she'd left behind, about how saving money felt both purposeful and devastating because every dollar she sent home was another week away from the people she loved. Brandon told her things he'd never told anyone, about feeling suffocated by expectations he'd never chosen, about how drugs made the pressure bearable until they didn't, about painting watercolors in his Princeton dorm room and knowing his family would call it a waste of time. "You're the only person here who's actually building something," he told her one May morning. "Everyone else just maintains what they inherited." Elena laughed, gesturing at herself in her scrubs, her hair tied back with a rubber band. I'm a caregiver. I empty bedpans. Brandon looked at her seriously. You support your whole family. You left everything to give them a better life. That's building something. The rest of us are just spending money other people earned. By July 2018, on Elena's 29th birthday, the relationship had shifted into territory both recognized but neither named. Her family had forgotten the date. Sophia was planning her wedding, Miguel was taking exams, and her parents had their own struggles. Patricia Ashford certainly didn't know or care. But Brandon appeared at the carriage house door that evening with a bouquet of white roses and a small box containing pearl earrings. You shouldn't have, Elena said, genuinely distressed because the earrings looked expensive, and accepting expensive gifts from employers' sons crossed lines she'd been careful not to cross. I wanted to, Brandon replied. You deserve to be remembered on your birthday. It was the first time someone had made her feel valued in America, not for what she did but for who she was. In August, Brandon tried to quit cocaine. He'd been using for 9 years, and the withdrawal was brutal, sweating through sheets, vomiting, shaking so hard he couldn't hold a glass. His family's response was to ignore it, to let him suffer in the pool house alone because acknowledging the problem meant acknowledging their failure to fix it. Elena found him on the 3rd day, delirious and dehydrated, and she spent the next 72 hours managing his symptoms with the same competence she used caring for Margaret. She brought electrolyte drinks, cool washcloths, and most importantly, presents. She sat beside him when the panic attacks came, when he was convinced he was dying, when he begged her to just let him use one more time. You're stronger than this, she told him. I've seen what strong looks like, and you have it. By the time the worst passed, something had fundamentally changed between them. September 2018 brought the first kiss. It happened in the estate's greenhouse at midnight, surrounded by Richard's prized orchids and the humid warmth that kept the tropical plants alive through Connecticut winters. Brandon had started showing up to work more regularly, had started attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings that Elena drove him to in her old Honda. She'd learned to drive that summer, and Brandon had taught her, hours spent in empty parking lots while he explained pedals and mirrors. They'd been laughing about something, and the laughter had faded into one of those silences that feels full instead of empty, and Brandon had reached across the space between them and kissed her. Elena had kissed him back. Later, she would remember thinking this was dangerous, this was forbidden, this would end badly. But in that moment, surrounded by flowers that cost more than she earned in a month, being kissed by a man who saw her as an equal, she felt like she'd finally arrived at something real in America. By October, they'd established rules. Absolute secrecy. If the family discovered the relationship, Elena would be fired immediately and probably reported to immigration for some manufactured violation. Never in the main house where cameras or family might see. No public acknowledgement of any kind. Elena continued her work with professional distance. Brandon continued living in the pool house. To the Ashford family, they barely interacted. In reality, they were building a life in the margins, in the hours between midnight and dawn, in the carriage house that smelled like river stone and Elena's jasmine candles. Margaret noticed. Of course she noticed. At 76 with Parkinson's ravaging her body, her mind remained sharp during those increasingly rare lucid windows. My grandson smiles now, she told Elena one November morning, while Elena helped her with physical therapy exercises. That's your doing, isn't it? Elena felt her face flush. I don't know what you mean, ma'am. Margaret laughed, a sound like dry leaves. Lying is beneath you, child. I'm happy for you both. This family needs new blood. God knows our blood has been poisoned by money for long enough. She reached out with a trembling hand and gripped Elena's wrist with surprising strength. Don't let them break you. You're stronger than they'll ever be. The relationship deepened through 2019 and 2020 with the strange intensity of love conducted in secret. Brandon's cocaine use dropped from daily to weekly, then to occasional relapses still happened, but they were becoming less frequent. He started painting again, setting up a small studio in the greenhouse where nobody bothered him. His father, Richard, actually complimented his work performance, which shocked everyone. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, Richard had said, completely unaware that what Brandon was doing was falling in love with someone his family would never accept. For Elena, the relationship meant she was building something in America beyond just sending money home. She'd saved $35,000 in 3 years, not nearly what she'd hoped, because living expenses ate more than she'd budgeted, but she had Brandon, and that felt like wealth she couldn't quantify. But love in secret is love on borrowed time. By late 2020, Elena's isolation was becoming unbearable. Her old friends in Manila had moved on. Marco had married someone else. Her family's video calls felt increasingly distant. How could she explain her life when she couldn't mention the most important part? Her mother Luz asked during a Christmas call, "Are they treating you well, Anik? You seem different, sad." Elena lied and said she was fine, that she was just tired, that caregiving was hard work. The truth, that she was in love with her employer's drug-addicted son, and that their relationship could never be acknowledged publicly, was impossible to speak aloud. On January 8, 2021, everything changed. Margaret woke that morning with unusual clarity, the kind of lucidity that happens sometimes before the end, when dying people suddenly seem returned to themselves. She called her attorney, James Morrison, who'd handled the Ashford family's legal affairs for 30 years. "James, I need you here today," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "It's urgent, and I'm not confused, so don't treat me like I am." Morrison arrived at 2 p.m. and spent 90 minutes in Margaret's room while Patricia hovered outside, trying to hear through the door. When Morrison left, he carried with him documents that would eventually expose a murder. Margaret had revised her will completely. She left Richard $5 million instead of 15. "He married money. He doesn't need mine." Patricia received $3 million in a trust she couldn't touch principal on. "She'll drug herself to death given access." Stephen received $8 million, Vanessa the same. But Brandon, the family disappointment, received $15 million, nearly doubled from the original. And in a codicil that Morrison read twice to make sure he'd heard correctly, Margaret left $500,000 to Elena Marie Domingo. The codicil's language was specific and devastating. "I leave $500,000 to Elena Marie Domingo, who has shown me more compassion in 4 years than my blood has shown in 76 years. She is a woman of character, intelligence, and genuine goodness. I furthermore express my deepest wish that my grandson Brandon formalize his relationship with her. She has returned him to us, and I pray my family will have the grace to welcome her as I have." Morrison had asked 3 times if Margaret was certain. She'd smiled. "I've never been more certain of anything. If they contest this, you fight for her. Promise me." Morrison had promised. Margaret also wrote a personal letter, notarized and sealed, to be read only after her death. In it, she detailed exactly why she'd made these decisions, describing Elena's character and Brandon's transformation with the clear-eyed observation of someone who'd watched her family for 76 years and found them wanting. She ended with words that would later be read in a courtroom. "To my family, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're likely angry. Elena earned this money through labor and love, something foreign to you. She asks for nothing. She gives everything. That's why she deserves it. Brandon deserves happiness. If you deny them this, you prove everything I've always known about your cruelty." Stephen Ashford discovered the will change on February 3, 2021. He'd been reviewing Margaret's monthly finances, he had power of attorney, and noticed a $4,500 charge from Morrison and Associates for estate services. When he called Morrison demanding an explanation, the attorney had refused details. "That's privileged. Ask your grandmother directly." But Margaret was napping, and Stephen had never been good at waiting. He searched her room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been invading privacy his entire life. Her laptop was under her bed, password protected with Thomas 1945, his grandfather's name and birth year, obvious to anyone who knew the family. The email account contained everything. Morrison's message laid it out clinically. Brandon's inheritance increased, Elena named as beneficiary, the codicil about formalizing their relationship, the reduction in distributions to everyone else. Stephen read it twice, then read the attached PDF of the actual codicil. His face went through several colors, red, then white, then something darker. He threw the laptop across the room, where it shattered against Margaret's dresser. For 20 minutes he paced, calculating. His inheritance was reduced by $5 million. His drug-addict brother was getting $7 million more. And $500,000 was going to the Filipino help who earned $800 a week. More than the money, though the money was infuriating, was what this represented. Elena legitimized, Brandon corrupted by a foreigner, the family humiliated in front of Connecticut society, his children having to explain that Uncle Brandon married the caregiver. Stephen had $2.3 million in gambling debts that his wife Caroline didn't know about. He needed that inheritance. But beyond need was something more visceral. The rage of a man who'd been taught since birth that the world belonged to him, finding out that a woman from the Philippines was about to take what he considered his by right. The following evening, February 4, 2021, Stephen convened an emergency family meeting in Richard's study. He summoned his father, his mother, his sister. He explicitly excluded Brandon and Margaret. At 8 p.m., he laid copies of the will revision on the mahogany table and watched his family's faces change as they read. Patricia's hands shook so badly she had to set the papers down. She reached into her Chanel bag and swallowed a Xanax without water. Richard read in silence, his jaw tightening. Vanessa read twice, then looked up. She means marriage. Formalize his relationship means marriage to the help. For an hour, they discussed options. Could they have Margaret revoke it during a confused episode? Morrison had documented her lucidity too carefully. Could they claim undue influence? Morrison would testify she'd been coherent. Could they simply fire Elena and hope the problem disappeared? She was already named in a legal document. Stephen stood, his voice tight with controlled fury. Let me be clear about what's at stake. A Filipino caregiver who we pay $40,000 a year is about to inherit $500,000 and become part of this family through marriage. Our mother, clearly manipulated, has decided that someone who's been here 4 years deserves our money. Patricia's voice was shrill. My friends at the club, if they find out Brandon married the help, we'd be a joke. Richard, ever practical. It's not just reputation. My clients trust me because of our family's standing. This makes us look desperate. They crafted a plan. Stage an intervention about Brandon's drug use. Send him to Switzerland for 6 months at $75,000 a month. Fire Elena with a $50,000 severance and mandatory NDA. Manipulate Margaret during her next confused episode to sign a revised will. The vote was unanimous. Stephen would handle Brandon. Richard would talk to Morrison about legal options. The meeting adjourned at 9:15 p.m. What they didn't know was that Brandon had been standing in the hallway. The study door hadn't latched completely. He'd heard everything. The disgust in their voices, the plan to separate him from Elena, the casual cruelty with which they discussed destroying the first good thing in his life. He went to the pool house shaking, not from withdrawal but from rage and betrayal. He texted Elena, "Need to see you. Emergency. Carriage house at midnight." Then he did something he hadn't done in 6 months. He found his cocaine stash, the emergency supply he'd kept hidden even during sobriety, and he used. The familiar burn, the bitter drip, the way reality softened at its edges. He told himself he needed it just this once, just to think clearly, just to figure out what to do. By 11 p.m., he'd convinced himself of a plan. They would run. Tonight, they'd elope, hire lawyers, contest the will, testify about his family's coercion. They'd take what Margaret wanted them to have and disappear. But plans made on cocaine rarely account for reality. And Brandon had no idea that his family was already moving faster than he was. That his father had cash in the safe. That his mother had practiced forging Elena's handwriting. That his brother Stephen had already decided that the Elena problem required a more permanent solution than money or NDAs could provide. In families like the Ashfords, love between the wrong people wasn't just forbidden. It was a cancer that had to be cut out completely. And Stephen Ashford had never hesitated when cutting was required. At 9:20 p.m. on February 4, 2021, Brandon Ashford sat in the pool house with his heart hammering against his ribs and cocaine burning through his sinuses. It was the first time he'd used in 6 months, and his body remembered the chemical rush with the enthusiasm of an old friend returning. His hands shook as he typed the message to Elena, deleting and rewriting it 3 times before sending, "Need to see you. Emergency. Come to carriage house at midnight." The phone screen blurred as he stared at it, waiting for her response. When it came, "Are you okay? What happened?" He typed back, "I'll explain everything. Just pack a bag. We're leaving tonight." Brandon's mind raced through scenarios with the fractured logic of someone high and terrified. His family was planning to destroy them. He'd heard every word through that study door, the contempt in Stephen's voice, his mother's horror at the thought of Brandon marrying the help, his father's cold calculations about reputation and business. They were going to send him to Switzerland, fire Elena, manipulate Margaret into changing the will. But what if they ran? What if they drove to Rhode Island tonight, got married at a courthouse tomorrow morning, hired a lawyer to fight for what Margaret had wanted them to have. He had access to accounts his family didn't monitor closely. He could withdraw $50,000 by morning. They could disappear into America, into the vast anonymous spaces between Connecticut's estates and the rest of the country. What Brandon couldn't understand through the cocaine and panic, was that his family had already moved past planning into action. That while he was formulating escape routes, his father was counting out $50,000 in cash from the study safe. That his mother was practicing Elena's handwriting on scrap paper, copying the loops and slants from grocery lists Elena had left on the kitchen counter. That his brother Stephen had made a decision that went far beyond money or reputation, a decision that would transform him from entitled aristocrat into murderer. At 10:30 p.m., the family reconvened in Richard's study. Stephen's report was clinical. Brandon texted someone, probably her. He's high, I can tell from his typing pattern. He's unstable. Richard set the cash on his desk, $50,000 in hundreds, rubber-banded into neat stacks. We offer her this plane ticket home tomorrow. She signs an NDA, releases any claims, and disappears. Patricia held up a piece of paper covered in Elena's handwriting. She'd been practicing for 30 minutes, and the forgery was perfect. I can write whatever note we need. Family emergency in Manila. She had to leave suddenly. Vanessa, who'd been silent until now, spoke quietly. What if she refuses the money? The room fell silent. Stephen looked at his father, then his mother, then his sister. Then we make her disappear anyway. Richard's protest was weak, the objection of a man who'd spent his life avoiding unpleasant realities. Stephen, we're not talking about. Stephen cut him off. I'm talking about protecting this family by any means necessary. Foreign workers disappear every day. She's got no real immigration status, no documentation trail that matters. We make it look like she left, packed her bags, went home, ghosted Brandon. He's high right now. He'll believe whatever we tell him. Patricia, her voice steadied by pharmaceuticals, added her expertise. I can forge a goodbye note. I've studied her handwriting enough. We pack her things like she left in a hurry. Say there was a family emergency. Vanessa looked at her father, her voice rising. Daddy? What exactly are we talking about doing? Richard didn't answer. He stared at the cash on his desk, at the life he'd built, at the family he'd raised to value preservation of status above all else. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the resignation of someone who'd already made his choice. Let's just go talk to her. Offer the money. See what happens. At 11 p.m., Elena was in Margaret's room, conducting the final medication check of the night. Margaret's Parkinson's had been particularly severe that day. Her hands had trembled so badly she'd knocked over her water glass twice, and her speech had been slurred and frustrating. But now, dosed with her evening medications, she was drowsy but coherent. You look worried, child, Margaret said, her voice soft. Elena forced a smile. Just tired, ma'am. It's been a long day. Margaret studied her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Don't let them break you. You're stronger than they'll ever be. Elena felt tears threatening and blinked them back. I should let you sleep. Margaret reached out, her trembling hand catching Elena's wrist. Promise me you'll fight for your happiness. Promise me. Elena squeezed the old woman's hand gently. I promise, ma'am. Margaret's eyes were already closing. You're the daughter I wish I'd had, she whispered, and then sleep took her. Elena returned to the carriage house at 11:30 p.m. Brandon's text had frightened her more than she wanted to admit. His message about leaving, about packing, it felt reckless, dangerous. But she trusted him, loved him, and if he said they needed to go, she would go. She pulled her suitcase from the closet and started folding clothes, her hands moving automatically while her mind spun through implications. Running meant leaving her job, her visa status, everything she'd built. But staying might mean losing Brandon to Switzerland, losing Margaret's bequest, losing the first real chance at a future she'd had since coming to America. She texted Brandon, "Are you sure about this? Running feels wrong." His response came immediately, "They're planning something. I heard them. We have to go. I love you." She typed back, "I love you too." Midnight. The knock on the carriage house door came at 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. Elena opened it expecting Brandon but found instead Stephen and Richard Ashford standing on her small porch. Stephen wore khakis and a polo shirt, casual for him, but the outfit looked rehearsed, like he'd dressed for a specific purpose. Richard stood slightly behind his son, his face unreadable in the porch light. "Elena," Stephen said, his voice carrying false friendliness. "We need to talk." Elena's stomach clenched. "About what?" Richard spoke, his tone almost apologetic. "May we come in? It's important." Elena stepped back, letting them into the small living area of the carriage house. The space felt suddenly cramped with these two men inside, men who'd barely acknowledged her existence in 4 years, now standing in her private space at midnight. Richard positioned himself near the door. Stephen sat on the arm of her couch, deliberately casual, and began speaking like a lawyer presenting a case. "Elena, we know about the will, about grandmother's wishes. We also know about you and Brandon." He paused, watching her face. "We're not angry. We understand. These things happen." Elena felt her face flush, but she kept her voice steady. "I never asked Mrs. Ashford for money. Brandon and I, that's separate. That's real." Stephen nodded as if agreeing, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He opened it, fanning out stacks of $100 bills. "This is $50,000. Cash. Yours right now. Plus a first-class plane ticket home tomorrow." He slid a document across her coffee table. "All you have to do is sign this. A simple NDA, a release of any claims to the estate, and you disappear. You go home to your family, never contact Brandon again, and you walk away with more money than you'd make in a year." Elena looked at the cash, more money than she'd ever seen in one place, then at the two men watching her. Something in their expressions told her this wasn't a negotiation. It was an ultimatum disguised as an offer. "I'm not leaving Brandon," she said quietly. "He needs me, and I won't sign away Mrs. Ashford's wishes." She made that decision with a clear mind. She wanted us to be together. Stephen's face hardened. The false friendliness evaporated like morning fog. "You manipulated a sick old woman. You seduced my brother to get access to our money. You're a con artist with a nursing degree." The accusation stung because it was exactly what she'd feared people would think, exactly what the family would claim to anyone who'd listen. But Elena had spent 4 years being treated as invisible, and something in her refused to accept this narrative. "I love your brother. Your mother saw that. If you try to change her will against her wishes, I'll testify to what I've seen. Years of you stealing from accounts." She looked at Richard. "Your fraud with client funds." Back to Stephen. "Your mother's addiction that you all enable. I've seen everything. I'm the invisible help. Remember? You people talk about everything in front of me like I'm furniture." Elena stood, her voice gaining strength. "I'll go to court. I'll tell the truth. Your family's secrets, all of them, will come out. So no, I won't take your money. I won't sign your papers. And I won't let you manipulate your mother into changing what she decided in her right mind." The threat hung in the air between them. Stephen stood slowly from the couch arm, his face transforming into something Elena had never seen before. Not anger, but something colder and more dangerous. His eyes went to the fireplace poker leaning against the river stone hearth, a piece of decorative wrought iron that Elena had never used. When he looked back at her, his pupils were dilated, his breathing shallow. "You're threatening my family," he said quietly. "An immigrant worker is threatening to destroy everything we've built." Richard saw the shift in his son's expression. "Stephen, let's just go. Let's think about this." But Stephen had already moved toward the fireplace. His hand closed around the poker's handle. Elena saw it happening and understood, in that terrible moment of clarity that comes just before violence, exactly what was about to happen. She screamed Brandon's name, turned to run toward the door, but Stephen was faster. The first blow caught her on the side of the head, above her left ear, and the world exploded into white light and pain. She fell, her knees hitting the floor, and she tried to crawl, tried to reach the door, but her body wasn't responding correctly. The second blow hit her shoulder as she raised her arm defensively. She heard the bone crack, felt the grinding sensation, and screamed again. "Please," she gasped, looking at Richard Ashford, who stood frozen by the door. "Help me." Richard's face had gone white, but he didn't move. He turned away, facing the door, his hands over his ears like a child trying to block out sounds. Stephen brought the poker down again, and again. Elena tried to speak, tried to beg, but her mouth was full of blood and the words wouldn't form. Her last coherent thought was of her mother in Davos City, of the promise she'd made to come home in 2 years, and how she'd broken that promise in the worst possible way. At 12:11 a.m. on February 5, 2021, Elena Marie Domingo died on the floor of the carriage house, surrounded by packed suitcases for a trip she'd never take. Stephen dropped the poker, his hands shaking, his shirt spattered with blood. "Fuck," he whispered. "Fuck, fuck." Richard turned back from the door, his face gray. He knelt beside Elena's body, checking for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. "She's dead. Oh God, she's dead." Stephen's breathing was ragged, but his voice was already regaining control. "We fix this. Go get Mother. Get Vanessa. We need everyone. And bring something to sedate Brandon when he gets here. He'll be here any minute." Richard stared at his son. "What have we done? Stephen, what have we?" Stephen grabbed his father's shoulders hard. "We protected this family. Now we finish it. Go." Brandon arrived at 12:15 a.m., cocaine still singing through his system, ready to collect Elena and start their new life. He entered the carriage house calling her name, and the scene that met him shattered what remained of his sanity. Elena's body on the floor, blood pooled beneath her head, his brother standing over her with blood on his hands. Brandon's scream was animalistic, wordless, the sound of something fundamental breaking inside a human being. He lunged at Stephen, but Richard caught him, held him back with surprising strength. "You killed her. What did you do?" Brandon was sobbing, fighting, trying to reach Elena's body. "Let me go. Let me." Patricia arrived at 12:17 a.m. with Vanessa behind her. Patricia carried a small leather medical bag, the kind she kept stocked with her various prescriptions. Vanessa saw the body and vomited outside the door, her hand over her mouth. Patricia's face was eerily calm, the pills she'd taken creating a buffer between her and reality. "We need to contain this," she said clinically. From her bag, she withdrew a syringe and a small vial of lorazepam, 4 milligrams, enough to sedate a large man. Brandon was still fighting his father, still screaming accusations. "You're murderers, all of you. I'll tell everyone. I'll—" Patricia moved behind him and jabbed the needle into his shoulder, pushing the plunger. Brandon's words slurred. "Liars, you killed her. I saw." His eyes were losing focus. Patricia prepared a second syringe. "You won't tell anyone anything," she said softly, and injected him again. By 12:22 a.m., Brandon was unconscious on the floor beside Elena's body, and the Ashford family stood in silence, staring at what they'd become. The next 6 hours would demonstrate something terrifying about the Ashford family, their capacity for methodical evil when survival required it. At 12:30 a.m., still inside the carriage house with 2 bodies, one dead, one unconscious, they divided responsibilities with the efficiency of corporate executives managing a crisis. Patricia would handle documentation. Stephen and Richard would manage cleanup and disposal. Vanessa would pack Elena's belongings. Nobody discussed calling police. Nobody suggested confession. The decision to cover up the murder wasn't debated because in their world, the alternative was unthinkable. The Ashford name couldn't survive a murder trial. Their fortune couldn't survive the scrutiny. So they would make Elena Domingo disappear as if she'd never existed at all. Patricia worked at Elena's small desk, surrounded by samples of the dead woman's handwriting. Shopping lists, notes to Margaret about medication schedules, a journal entry Elena had left on the coffee table about missing her family. Patricia studied the loops of Elena's lowercase gs, the way she crossed her ts, the slight rightward slant of her script. After 30 minutes of practice, Patricia began writing on Elena's personal stationery, paper with small flowers in the corner that Elena had bought at a dollar store. "Dear Brandon," she wrote, her hands steady from years of Xanax smoothing her nerves. "I'm so sorry to do this, but my mother called. She's very sick. I need to go home to Manila right away. I can't wait or explain in person. I know this seems sudden, but family comes first." She paused, considering the next lines carefully. They needed to sting, needed to make Brandon believe Elena had never really loved him. "Maybe it's better this way. We both knew this couldn't last. You have your life here and I have mine there. Please don't try to find me. It's better if we make a clean break. Take care of your grandmother." Patricia signed it Elena, with the exact signature she'd practiced, then read it twice more. Perfect. Cold enough to wound, plausible enough to believe. She left it on the coffee table where Brandon would find it later, then moved to stage 2, the financial trail. At 2 a.m., Stephen drove downtown in Elena's Honda Accord. Richard had retrieved her keys from her purse to an ATM outside a closed CVS pharmacy. He wore gloves and a baseball cap pulled low, though the security camera's angle was wrong to catch his face clearly. He inserted Elena's debit card, entered her PIN, 1989, her birth year, which he'd memorized from watching her use the ATM during errands, and withdrew $1,800, emptying the account. The receipt showed the transaction timestamp, 2:03 and 47 seconds a.m. He pocketed the cash and destroyed the card with a hammer in the CVS parking lot, scattering the pieces in a storm drain. When investigators eventually pulled ATM footage, they'd see a figure roughly Elena's height. Stephen had hunched down, withdrawing money at 2 a.m. It would support the narrative. She'd needed cash to leave the country quickly. Back at the estate, Richard and Stephen began the physical cleanup with the grim determination of men who'd committed themselves fully to the unthinkable. They rolled Elena's body in a heavy plastic tarp from Richard's garage, the kind used for protecting furniture during construction. The blood on the carriage house floor came up with hydrogen peroxide and industrial bleach, scrubbed for hours until the wood lightened but the stains disappeared. They found Elena's diary, a small notebook where she'd written in Tagalog about her homesickness, her love for Brandon, her hopes for their future, and burned it in the estate's fire pit at 4 a.m., watching the pages curl and blacken. Her phone and laptop went into a garbage bag for later disposal in a dumpster behind a shopping center 20 miles away. Vanessa, meanwhile, packed Elena's belongings with shaking hands. She folded clothes into the suitcase Elena had started packing, trying not to think about the woman who'd worn these shirts, these shoes, who'd chosen these photographs to bring from the Philippines. Pictures of her family, her graduation, a beach somewhere tropical and beautiful. Vanessa left out Elena's work uniform on the bed, as if she'd changed before leaving suddenly. She packed toiletries, personal items, everything that said Elena Domingo lived here. The carriage house had to look like someone had left in a hurry, emotionally, but deliberately. When she finished, Vanessa sat on Elena's bed and wept, though she'd later tell herself she didn't know exactly why. The body's temporary storage presented a problem they'd anticipated. The estate's greenhouse, built in 1924, had a basement access through a floor hatch, an old root cellar from when the property had been a working farm. It was cold, dark, and used for decades, filled with forgotten furniture and garden equipment. At 3:30 a.m., Stephen and Richard carried the tarp-wrapped body across the dark lawn, moving between the main house's camera angles, and lowered Elena into the cellar through the hatch. The space smelled of earth and rot. They piled old furniture around the tarp, closed the hatch, and locked it. The body would stay there for weeks while they prepared the permanent disposal site, a plan already forming in Richard's mind, contingent on a construction project he'd scheduled months earlier. Richard had been planning to expand the wine cellar since 2020. Permits were filed. Contractors were scheduled to begin March 1st. The greenhouse would be demolished first to make room for the expansion, and the old basement beneath it would be filled in during excavation. It was perfect, almost obscenely so. Elena's body would be dissolved in lye solution to accelerate decomposition, then buried during the excavation and sealed beneath 12 feet of concrete and steel reinforcement. By the time Italian limestone was installed over the new wine cellar floor, Elena Domingo would be part of the foundation, literally supporting the weight of the Ashfords' wealth. But first they had to manage Brandon. At 6 a.m., as dawn broke over Connecticut, Patricia called Dr. Michael Torres, a private psychiatrist who'd treated Brandon before. She explained that Brandon had overdosed badly, was experiencing acute psychotic delusions, and needed immediate psychiatric hospitalization. Dr. Torres, who knew the family's history and their ability to pay premium rates for discretion, arrived within an hour. Brandon was still unconscious from the double dose of lorazepam. When he woke at Riverside Oaks Psychiatric Facility at noon, restrained in a bed with an .4 in his arm, his protests about murder were dismissed as cocaine-induced paranoia. "You overdosed, Brandon," Dr. Torres explained patiently. "You were hallucinating." Elena left. She had a family emergency. Here's her note. They showed him Patricia's forgery, now laminated, treated as evidence of abandonment rather than murder. Brandon screamed that he'd seen her body, seen the blood, seen Stephen standing over her. "I saw them kill her." Dr. Torres increased his medication. Over the next 2 weeks, Between antipsychotics and sedatives and the constant repetition that he'd been hallucinating, Brandon's certainty began to crack. Maybe he'd been more high than he remembered. Maybe his family was telling the truth. Maybe Elena really had left him, and the horror he remembered was just his drug-addled brain creating nightmare scenarios. By week 3, he was asking his therapist, "Did I really see what I think I saw? Or am I losing my mind?" On March 1, 2021, Brandon was transferred to Alpine Wellness Recovery Center in Zurich, Switzerland, $75,000 per month for 6 months, paid in advance. 8,000 miles from Connecticut, no phone access for the first 60 days, intensive therapy and drug treatment designed to rebuild his sense of reality. The Ashfords visited once in 6 months. By then, Brandon had accepted the narrative they'd constructed. Elena had been a con artist who'd manipulated his grandmother and seduced him for access to wealth, then fled when confronted. The murder he remembered was a delusion, a guilty nightmare his cocaine-addicted brain had created. Back in Connecticut, the physical disposal proceeded according to Richard's timeline. On March 7th, after demolition crews had torn down the greenhouse's above-ground structure, Stephen and Richard accessed the basement after dark. They wore hazmat suits purchased from an industrial supply company. 30 gallons of lye solution, sodium hydroxide purchased in small quantities from 6 different hardware stores to avoid suspicion, weighted in industrial drums. They submerged Elena's remains in the solution and sealed the drums. Over 96 hours, the lye did its brutal work, dissolving soft tissue and accelerating decomposition. What remained, partial bones, teeth, fragments of plastic from the tarp, would be buried during the wine cellar excavation. On March 13th, excavation contractors dug the new wine cellar space 12 feet deep, 20 by 30 feet. That night, at 11 p.m., Richard and Stephen buried what remained of Elena Domingo at the deepest point of the excavation. They wrapped the remains in additional plastic layers, covered them with quick-dry cement, and by morning, construction continued normally. Workers poured 18 cubic yards of concrete on March 15th, creating a foundation reinforced with steel that would support the weight of Richard's wine collection. By April 1st, $200,000 in imported Carrara marble covered the floor. Richard hosted a tour for friends, showing off his new wine cellar, pouring expensive vintages while standing directly above Elena's grave. In Davao City, Philippines, Elena's family descended into anguish. When she missed her weekly video call, the first time in 4 years, her sister Sophia immediately tried calling the carriage house. The number was disconnected. She called the Ashford main house. Patricia answered, her voice sympathetic but final. "Oh, Elena? She had a family emergency and left quite suddenly. She mentioned something about her mother being ill. Didn't she tell you?" Sophia's blood went cold. "Our mother is fine. Elena would never leave without telling us." "Where did she go?" Patricia's voice carried just the right note of confusion. "I assumed she was coming home to you. I'm sorry. I don't have any other information. She just packed up and left." Sophia filed a missing person report with Manila police, contacted the Philippine consulate in New York, hired what investigators she could afford. But Elena's immigration status, technically an independent contractor, not an H-1B visa holder, meant she existed in a bureaucratic gray zone. The Ashford family's story was consistent. Elena had received an emergency call, withdrawn her money, and left. Nobody had seen her at airports, but foreign workers vanished from America regularly, falling through gaps in systems designed to track citizens but not immigrant laborers. By May 2021, the investigation had stalled. Elena Domingo was another missing Filipina worker, another statistic, another family whose daughter had disappeared into America's vast anonymous spaces. In Connecticut, life returned to normal for the Ashfords with remarkable speed. Stephen returned to managing client portfolios. Vanessa resumed her nonprofit consulting and charity luncheons. Patricia continued her medication routine and garden parties. Richard celebrated the completion of his wine cellar. And Margaret, asking daily where Elena had gone, received increasingly heavy sedation until she stopped asking altogether. The family had committed the perfect crime. They'd murdered a woman, erased her existence, and hidden her body where no one would ever think to look. They'd gaslit Brandon into doubting his own memories and exiled him 8,000 miles away. They'd faced the greatest threat to their privilege and eliminated it completely. What they couldn't control was time, or Margaret's will, or the fact that some lawyers take their duties seriously. Because in 14 months, Margaret would die, and her attorney would insist on finding Elena Domingo to fulfill a legal obligation. And when you bury someone beneath marble and concrete, you're not just hiding a body, you're creating a permanent crime scene. The Ashfords had built Elena's tomb into the foundation of their wealth. But foundations, no matter how solid, can be excavated. And the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface. Brandon Ashford returned to Connecticut on September 1, 2021, after 7 months in Switzerland, and he was a different person, or rather, a carefully constructed version of one. He'd gained 40 pounds of healthy weight, replacing the gaunt cocaine user physique with something that looked almost normal. His eyes were clear for the first time in a decade. He attended Narcotics Anonymous meetings 3 times weekly, took prescribed Zoloft for depression, and refused all benzodiazepines despite his therapist's recommendations. On paper, he was a recovery success story. In reality, he was a man living inside a carefully maintained lie, and the cracks were already forming. The family had renovated the carriage house during his absence. New floors, new paint, all traces of Elena erased. Brandon was given the pool house again, the same space where he'd lived during his addiction, and the symbolism wasn't lost on him. He worked full-time at Ashford Capital Management now, arriving at 8 a.m. and staying until 6, managing client portfolios with mechanical competence. He attended Sunday dinners at the main house, where Patricia served pot roast and Stephen discussed market trends, and nobody ever mentioned Elena's name. To anyone observing, Brandon had been successfully reintegrated into the family business and family life. But every night, alone in the pool house, Brandon wrote in a journal his therapists had encouraged him to keep. The entries revealed a man teetering on the edge of sanity, caught between what he remembered and what his family insisted was real. September 15, 2021. Something's wrong. I can feel her. Elena wouldn't leave like they said. Her note, family comes first. She'd say, family is first. She was particular about English. She wouldn't make that mistake. The entries continued through October. October 3rd. Ask Stephen about Elena's forwarding address today. He got angry, said she was a con artist and I need to stop obsessing. But why angry? Why not just give me an address if she really left? November brought more doubts. November 2nd. Went to the wine cellar today to get bottles for father's client dinner. Stephen panicked when he saw me there. Rushed me out. Said there were construction issues still being resolved. The cellar's been finished for 6 months. What's he hiding? In December 2021, Brandon did something he'd been too afraid to do before. He contacted Pacific Care Solutions, the agency that had placed Elena with his family. He used a burner phone purchased with cash, calling from a rest stop on Interstate 95. The woman who answered, Gladys Chun, remembered Elena immediately. Such a sweet girl. Reliable. We haven't heard from her since early 2021, and that's unusual. Our workers usually keep in touch. Brandon's heart hammered. She didn't tell you she was going home? Didn't file any exit paperwork? Gladys's voice carried concern. No. We actually flagged her file as concerning. No flight manifests, no exit records with customs. She just disappeared from our system. Her sister called us from the Philippines, filed missing person reports. Mr. Ashford, if you know anything. Brandon hung up, his hands shaking. Elena was officially missing. Her family had been searching for her. The note, the story about the family emergency, the sudden departure, it was all fabricated. He drove back to the estate in a fog, and that night he wrote, December 18, 2021. They lied about everything. Elena didn't leave. She didn't go home. She's missing, and they know what happened. I saw her body. I know I did. They convinced me I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. They killed her. My family murdered the woman I loved, and I've been living with them, eating dinner with them, pretending to believe their lies. Margaret Ashford died on January 14, 2023, at 6:47 a.m., in the same first-floor bedroom where Elena had cared for her. The current caregiver, a Haitian woman named Alice who'd lasted longer than most because she asked no questions and kept to herself, found Margaret peaceful in death, finally released from the Parkinson's that had imprisoned her for 6 years. The family gathered, performing grief appropriately. Patricia wept into a handkerchief. Stephen eulogized his grandmother at St. Catherine's Episcopal Church as a woman of grace and wisdom. Vanessa arranged flowers. Richard handled the logistics. Brandon stood at the funeral and thought only about how Margaret had wanted him to be with Elena, had written it into her will, had tried to give them both a future. He felt like he was burying two people. The will reading occurred on January 25, 2023, at the offices of Morrison & Associates, a downtown firm occupying the third floor of a brick building that had stood since 1887. James Morrison, 73 years old and approaching retirement, had handled Ashford family legal matters for 3 decades. He drafted Margaret's will revision in January 2021, had witnessed her lucidity, had promised to execute her wishes exactly. The family sat in leather chairs around a conference table. Richard, Patricia, Stephen, Vanessa, Brandon, expecting a standard distribution that would confirm their wealth and end this unpleasant business. Morrison read through the preliminaries, then reached the section that made Stephen's face go white. To Ms. Elena Marie Domingo, the sum of $500,000, in recognition of her exceptional care and genuine compassion during my final years. Stephen interrupted, his voice tight. That's outdated. She left in early 2021. She's gone. Morrison looked at him over reading glasses. The will was never revoked. Ms. Domingo is still a legal beneficiary regardless of her current whereabouts. Richard leaned forward. We don't know where she is. We have no way to contact her. Morrison's expression didn't change. Then I'm legally obligated to make reasonable efforts to locate her. The estate cannot be fully settled until all beneficiaries are accounted for. Morrison continued reading, reaching the codicil that Margaret had crafted with such care. The words filled the conference room like smoke, choking the family with their implications. Margaret's letter, notarized and preserved, laid bare her observations about Elena's character, Brandon's transformation, and her explicit wish that they formalize their relationship. When Morrison finished reading, silence stretched for 30 seconds. Patricia's hands trembled. Stephen's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Vanessa stared at the table. Brandon wept openly, tears streaming down his face. Not just for Margaret, but for Elena, for the future they'd been denied, for the truth that was finally forcing itself into daylight. Morrison outlined his next steps. He would hire investigators to locate Elena Domingo. He would contact her family in the Philippines. He would conduct a thorough search, as required by law, with a 6-month timeline for resolution. If Elena was deceased, her family would inherit. The estate could not be distributed until this matter was resolved. After the meeting, in the parking lot, Stephen grabbed Richard's arm hard enough to bruise. We need to stop this. Richard's face was gray. How? He's doing his legal duty. If we interfere, we draw suspicion. Patricia, medicated into calmness, stated the obvious. What if they find? What if they? Vanessa finished the thought. Find what, mother? She left. She's in the Philippines, remember? But Patricia and Stephen both knew better, and the look they exchanged contained 2 years of shared guilt. Morrison hired Sarah Chun, a former FBI agent who'd specialized in missing persons before starting her private investigation firm. Chun charged $500 an hour, billed to Margaret's estate, and she was thorough to the point of obsession. Her initial research revealed immediate problems with the Ashford family's narrative. Pacific Care Solutions had no exit records for Elena. Customs and Border Protection showed no departure from the United States in 2021. The Philippine consulate had no entry records. Elena's sister Sophia had filed missing person reports in both countries. The timeline made no sense. How had Elena traveled from Connecticut to the Philippines without leaving any documentation trail? Chun interviewed Sophia via video call, recording the conversation in her office while Connecticut rain hammered the windows. Sophia, 36 now, had dark circles under her eyes from 2 years of searching for her sister. She showed Chun emails from Elena, the last one dated February 3, 2021. Things are tense here. Brandon wants to talk tonight about something serious. I'm nervous but hopeful. I love him, Sophia. I think we might have a real future. Sophia's voice broke. That was the last time I heard from her. No email on February 5th about a family emergency. No call, no text, nothing. Elena would never just disappear. Our mother is sick from worry. She knows something terrible happened. Chun obtained the goodbye note the Ashfords claimed Elena had left. She sent it to Dr. Robert Wade, a forensic document examiner who'd testified in 43 criminal trials. Wade spent 6 hours analyzing the note under magnification, comparing it to known samples of Elena's handwriting. His report landed on Chen's desk 2 weeks later. Significant inconsistencies in stroke pressure, letter formation patterns, and baseline variance. The signature shows hesitation marks consistent with forgery. High probability, 92% confidence, that this note was written by someone copying Elena Domingo's handwriting rather than by Ms. Domingo herself. On March 15, 2023, Chun requested a meeting with Brandon Ashford at a coffee shop in downtown Riverside County, a neutral location away from his family's influence. Brandon arrived 15 minutes early, ordered black coffee he didn't drink, and sat in a corner booth watching the door like a fugitive. When Chen arrived, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back severely. Brandon knew immediately this was the moment everything would either break open or be buried forever. "Tell me about your relationship with Elena," Chen said, pulling out a digital recorder. Brandon took a breath and made his choice. For 3 hours, Brandon told Chen everything. The late-night conversations, the love that developed, Margaret's will, the family meeting he'd overheard, his text to Elena about running away. Then came the part he'd convinced himself was hallucination. Arriving at the carriage house at midnight, seeing Elena's body on the floor, the blood, Stephen standing over her with the poker, his father watching. He described being sedated, waking up in psychiatric care, 7 months of being told he'd imagined everything. He showed Chun his journal, 2 years of dated entries documenting his doubts. He played recordings from therapy sessions where he'd described the hallucinations that were actually memories. "Why didn't you go to police when you got back?" Chen asked. Brandon's laugh was bitter. "They had me committed, medicated. By the time I got out, I didn't trust my own mind. They showed me her note, the ATM withdrawal, told me I'd overdosed and imagined it all. I thought I was insane." His voice dropped. "But I'm not insane. They killed her. My family murdered Elena because she threatened their perfect world, and they buried her somewhere on that estate." Chun closed her notebook. "I need to contact police. This is beyond a missing person case." Brandon nodded, finally feeling the weight lift slightly. "I know. I'll testify. I'll tell everything. I just want her found. Her family deserves to know what happened." On April 1, 2023, Connecticut State Police Detective Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez received Sarah Chen's report and immediately understood this was the kind of case that would define his career. Rodriguez, 48, had worked major crimes for 15 years, and he'd seen enough wealthy families protect themselves to recognize the pattern. He secured a search warrant for Willowbrook Estate within 72 hours, assembling a team that included 12 officers, 2 cadaver dogs, forensic technicians, and a ground-penetrating radar specialist. The warrant was specific and comprehensive. Any and all locations on the property where human remains might be concealed, including but not limited to buildings, grounds, and recent construction sites. The search began at 6 a.m. on April 5, 2023. Officers swept through the main house, finding nothing except Patricia's excessive prescription medications and Richard's financial records. The pool house yielded Brandon's journals, which were seized as evidence. But the real alerts came from the dogs, 2 Belgian Malinois trained to detect human decomposition. They showed no interest in the main house or pool house. They went absolutely frantic at the location where the greenhouse had stood, circling and pawing at bare ground where the foundation had been demolished. Soil samples taken from that area showed trace amounts of sodium hydroxide, Li, in concentrations that suggested intentional use rather than natural occurrence. The ground-penetrating radar operator, scanning the wine cellar floor, called Rodriguez over at 2:30 p.m. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." The radar showed an anomaly 11 feet below the limestone floor, a density inconsistency that suggested organic matter in an area that should be pure concrete and earth. The cadaver dogs, brought into the wine cellar, went berserk at one specific location, scratching at $200 per square foot Italian marble with desperate intensity. Rodriguez looked at the dogs, at the radar readings, at Richard Ashford's face draining of color. "We need to excavate," Rodriguez said. Richard's attorney protested that the wine cellar represented $200,000 in construction. The search warrant was clear. They would dig. The excavation began the next morning. Jackhammers broke through Carrara marble that had been installed just 2 years earlier, reducing expensive stone to rubble. Beneath the marble, layers of concrete required diamond blade saws and hours of brutal work. 12 feet of concrete and steel reinforcement came up in chunks. At 3:47 p.m. on April 6, 2023, Almost exactly 2 years after Elena's murder, forensic technicians reached the plastic-wrapped bundle at the bottom of the excavation. The cadaver dog's alerts intensified to the point where handlers had to remove them. The medical examiner, Dr. Lisa Patel, was called to the scene. Dr. Patel had performed over 3,000 autopsies in her career, but she'd remember Elena Domingo's remains for the rest of her life. The lye had done its brutal work, dissolving soft tissue and destroying much of what made the body recognizable as human. But bones remained: partial skull, ribs, long bones from arms and legs. Teeth remained, protected by enamel. And in the folds of the plastic tarp where lye hadn't fully penetrated, tissue remained that could be tested for DNA. "This is a crime scene," Dr. Patel announced unnecessarily, her voice tight with anger. "This is a homicide, and someone went to extraordinary lengths to hide it." The Willowbrook estate became a secured crime scene. The family was confined to the property, passports seized. Richard, Patricia, Stephen, and Vanessa were separated and questioned individually. Brandon, who'd led investigators to this discovery, was questioned but not arrested. The remains were transported to the state medical examiner's office for full analysis. And in Davao City, Sofia Domingo received a call from Detective Rodriguez that she'd been praying for and dreading for 2 years. "Ms. Domingo, we found remains on the Ashford property. We'll need your sister's dental records for positive identification, but I want you to prepare yourself. I believe we've found Elena." The identification took 6 days. Sofia Domingo provided dental x-rays from her sister's dentist in Davao City, records filed away since 2009, when Elena had a wisdom tooth extracted. Dr. Lisa Patel's forensic odontologist compared the x-rays to teeth recovered from the remains, examining 12 points of comparison: fillings, root canal work, the distinctive spacing of molars. On April 12, 2023, the match was confirmed with absolute certainty. The remains belonged to Elena Marie Domingo, deceased February 2021. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull, minimum 5 separate impacts. Defensive wounds on the arms showed she'd raised them to protect herself, had fought back, had known exactly what was happening. The manner of death was classified as homicide, and the Ashford family was officially facing murder charges. The forensic evidence mounted like a prosecutor's dream. DNA extracted from tissue preserved in the tarp's folds showed a male contributor profile that matched Stephen Ashford with 99.7% probability. His DNA was on her remains. Digital forensics delivered the second devastating blow. Stephen's computer contained browser history dated February 2021, how to dissolve body with acid, lye chemical decomposition human tissue, how long do murder investigations take, and ironically, can police recover deleted browser history? The ATM footage from February 5th at 2:03 a.m. showed a figure 6 feet 1 inch tall using Elena's card. She'd been 5'4". Facial recognition matched Stephen at 87% probability. On April 25, 2023, a grand jury returned indictments after 3 hours of deliberation. Stephen faced first-degree murder, abuse of corpse, obstruction of justice, and fraud. Richard was charged with second-degree murder under Connecticut's felony murder rule, plus accessory, obstruction, and conspiracy. Patricia faced accessory after the fact, obstruction, forgery, and conspiracy. Vanessa was charged with accessory after the fact, obstruction, and conspiracy. The arrests occurred simultaneously at 9 a.m. across Riverside County. Stephen was taken at his office, surrounded by partners and clients, news cameras capturing his protests. "This is insane. I want my lawyer." Richard collapsed in the wine cellar when handcuffed, suffering what doctors diagnosed as a severe panic attack. Patricia was arrested mid-massage at her day spa, eerily calm, a bottle containing 100 Xanax pills in her purse. Prescription for 30, the rest obtained through doctor shopping. Vanessa was arrested at her daughter's school pickup line. 8-year-old Lily watched her mother handcuffed and placed in a police cruiser, an image requiring years of therapy to process. Brandon watched the coverage from the pool house. When Stephen appeared on screen in handcuffs, he called Sarah Chun. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for finding her." That afternoon, he drove to where the carriage house had stood and left white roses with a note. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I let them convince me you'd left. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. I love you, Elena. I always will." The trial ran October 2023 through February 2024. Greenwich Gilded Cage, the media called it, though Greenwich was 2 counties away. 47 podcasts covered the case. Netflix announced a documentary. The courtroom packed daily with journalists and Connecticut Society members who'd once attended Patricia's garden parties. State Attorney Jennifer Walsh, 46, prosecuted with surgical precision. Her opening statement: "This case is about a family who believed their privilege made them untouchable. They murdered Elena Domingo not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she'd fallen in love with someone they considered beneath their station, and an elderly woman had recognized her worth. They killed her, erased her, and would have gotten away with it if not for Brandon Ashford, who chose truth over family." Brandon testified for 2 days. Defense attorneys cross-examined brutally. "You were high on cocaine that night?" "Yes." "Expelled from Princeton for drugs?" "Yes." "Multiple psychiatric hospitalizations?" "Yes." "So how do we know you're reliable?" Brandon looked at the jury directly. "Because I know what I saw. I saw the woman I loved dead on the floor. I saw my brother standing over her with blood on his hands. I've lived with that image every single day for 3 years. You don't forget something like that, no matter how many drugs they give you to try." Dr. Patel testified about autopsy findings, photographs making 2 jurors request breaks. "At least 5 blows to the head she suffered. Defensive wounds show she raised her arms to protect herself. She knew what was happening. She fought back." Dr. Robert Wade presented forgery analysis, proving Patricia had written the goodbye note. Sofia Domingo testified via video from the Philippines, reading Elena's last email about being hopeful for the future with Brandon. "My sister would never abandon us. She sent money every month. She was the most responsible person I knew. When she stopped calling, I knew immediately something terrible had happened." The verdicts came February 14, 2024, Valentine's Day. After 8 hours of deliberation, the courtroom fell silent. Stephen Ashford, guilty on all counts. Richard Ashford, guilty on all counts. Patricia Ashford, guilty on all counts. Vanessa Ashfordson, guilty on all counts. Sentencing occurred March 1. Judge Catherine Morrison showed no mercy. Stephen received life without parole. Richard got 25 years, eligible for parole at 84. Patricia received 15 years. Vanessa got 10 years. The Ashford empire collapsed immediately. Willowbrook estate sold for $14.2 million. $500,000 went to Elena's family as Margaret intended. Ashford Capital Management dissolved, costing investors $800 million. Stephen's wife divorced him. His children changed their surnames. Vanessa's husband won custody of Lily. Brandon renounced his $15 million inheritance, donating it to immigrant workers' rights organizations. He legally changed his name to Brandon Domingo. He became an addiction counselor in Hartford, earning $42,000 annually, living in a modest apartment, driving a used Toyota. He never married. "I had my one true love. Some people don't even get that." Every February 5th, he flies to Manila and visits Elena's grave. Elena's family established the Elena Domingo Memorial Foundation, helping over 2,400 immigrant workers in its first year. Connecticut passed Elena's law in 2024, requiring background checks for employers of live-in workers and creating abuse reporting systems. Elena is buried in Manila Memorial Park. Her headstone reads, Elena Marie Domingo, 1989 to 2021. She crossed oceans to help her family. She found love in a foreign land. She died because she refused to be silent. Her courage echoes forever. The documentary, Buried Beneath the Marble, achieved 43 million views. Sophia published My Sister's Keeper, which became a bestseller. Brandon wrote in his journal on the second anniversary, Elena, I couldn't save you then, but I'm honoring you now, every day, with every person I help, with every hour I stay sober. Your family knows what happened. The world knows your name. You're not buried and forgotten beneath their marble anymore. You're remembered, you're loved, and your death changed laws that will protect others. The Ashford family remains scattered across Connecticut prisons. Their names, once synonymous with aristocracy, now represent murder and privilege's casual cruelty. Beneath what was once their wine cellar, contractors filled the excavated space with clean earth. Nothing grows there yet, but someday it will. Elena Domingo gave her life building a better future for her family. Now her memory builds better futures for thousands of workers who might otherwise be invisible, disposable, forgotten. In death, she became more powerful than the family that killed her ever was in life. That's not justice. Nothing can bring her back, but it's legacy. It's love continuing after death. It's Elena winning, finally, permanently, forever.